Greetings, folks. My name is Sterling Gillum, and I'm honored to be the director of your National Naval Aviation Museum. We're thrilled to host today's panel on continuous improvement in the Blue Angels. We get to tell the story of naval aviation here at this museum, and naval aviation enjoys a rich 109-year legacy of continuous improvement. I'm thrilled also to introduce our landlord for today, Captain Tim Kinsella, Commanding Officer, Naval Air Station, Pensacola. Lucky?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this wonderful event here at the National Naval Aviation Museum. What better place for us to talk about leadership aspects than here in these hallowed halls of the Naval Aviation Museum. We stand on the shoulder of greats here in naval aviation, and there's so many lessons that we can learn from them. You may wonder, what does business have to do with the military? But I'll tell you, there's a lot of the leadership traits that we use here in the military that are essential to business, especially in the Blue Angels, who I'll tell you are the absolute epitome of professionalism. There's one thing, and Kevin, maybe it's something that you can ask here to your panel. There's something that the Blue Angels, and in fact everybody in the military, leans on heavily, and it's trust. Trust is so important to what we do. Without trust, we can't do our business in the military. We trust the maintainers that fix the engines, that fix the airplanes, and when we go flying, we trust that we did it right. We trust our wingmen, we trust our co-pilots. Trust is so important to what we do, and especially for the Blue Angels. They trust each other implicitly when they're flying, within a couple of feet away from each other. So how does trust, Kevin, how does trust come into what you do and what our Blue Angels have done, and how does that relate to business? How does trust come into that, and what can we learn from what the Blue Angels do in their business? So I hope you enjoy it. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here, and thank you very much. And before I go, I'll introduce Dr. Sherry Hartnett, who is a founding director of the Executive Mentor Program there at University of West Florida, and we're absolutely honored to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Captain Kinsella, for that warm welcome and those inspiring remarks. It's a privilege to be on board NAS Pensacola, especially today in honor of Veterans Day. To all those that have served and to all those that continue to serve, we thank you. And thank you to Captain Gillum for helping collaborate with us on this awesome event today. This fantastic 400,000 square foot museum is full of naval aviation history and awesome planes. And this Blue Angel Atrium is the perfect venue for this panel discussion. To everybody that is joining us today, welcome on behalf of the University of West Florida. We're delighted you're here. Every year, our Executive Mentor Program matches more than 100 business executives and students, one-on-one for mentoring throughout the year. In addition, we create other learning opportunities, like this event, that help benefit our students and the business community. Today, you are in for a treat as we listen to the Blue Angels talk about a culture of continuous improvement and how that relates to the business world today. Now, I ask our panelists if you would go ahead and join the stage and find your seats. And while they're joining the stage, let me introduce you to today's moderator. Captain Kevin Miller graduated from the University of Mississippi and earned his gold wings in 1983. He flew the FA-18C Hornet operationally, and he commanded in combat. He finished his career on the staff of the Secretary of the Navy, retiring with over 3,600 flight hours and 1,000 carrier landings. His many decorations include the Bronze Star and multiple air medals. He earned master's degrees from Florida State University and the Naval War College. Today, he's a defense consultant, and he's also an award-winning best-selling author of military thrillers, and his newest is called The Silver Waterfall. Kevin lives here in Pensacola, Florida, and he's a huge supporter of our Executive Mentor Program. Kevin, thank you for all of the volunteer hours that you have spent over the past 5 years mentoring our College of Business students. Also, thank you for the financial support and for moderating this panel discussion. With that, I turn it over to you, Captain Miller.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And as one of the dozens of mentors in the innovative and award-winning University of West Florida College of Business Executive Mentor Program, under the direction of Dr. Sherry Hardnett. Thank you, Sherry, for that kind introduction and the honor of moderating what we know will be an interesting and informative panel. Also with us today is Dean Richard Fountain of the College of Business. Good to see you, Rick. Captain Gillum and Captain Kinsella, longtime friends and shipmates. Thank you for hosting us today in this world-class aviation museum aboard what is arguably the finest naval air station in the world. No argument from you, right, Keith? We are here today in the Blue Angel atrium of your National Naval Aviation Museum to talk about a culture, one of exacting standards and honest assessment, a culture that prevails despite sweeping technical innovations. It's a culture that adapts and one that learns. This culture is part of an overarching bureaucratic institution, but is broken down into the most basic organizational and even interpersonal elements. Indeed, the aircraft on display here are mere machines that help tell human stories of achievement and service, that leverage the culture to increase organizational performance through improvements in aviation safety and combat effectiveness over the decades. What are the elements of this culture? Simply put, it begins with standardized training by qualified instructors, earned qualifications in writing at each career milestone. Then, for every evolution, no matter if routine or a one-off project, detailed planning, sometimes by a cross-functional team and sometimes just one person, covering the full range of actions and all the contingencies. Then, an extensive brief to all the participants with roles assigned and questions covered. During the evolution, a leader is assigned. A leader not only all follow, but expect to make decisions and correct decisions during the evolution to best accomplish the goal when the situation deteriorates as it can in any human endeavor. And finally, and this is the secret sauce, a thorough and frank debrief is conducted after every event with structure and without blame or rancor if goals are not met. This is where the learning occurs, where the culture is improved continuously after each and every action. This culture engenders trust up and down, building better communication and lesson capture. Again, one only needs to take a look at the machines on display around us. Better mousetraps, to include ways of approaching tasks, were built and fielded, all inside this culture of continuous improvement, a culture that, as we discuss it today, has applications in the business world. Today, to discuss this culture, we have with us, and welcome back to NAS Pensacola, 3 former Blue Angel demonstration pilots who live this culture in its most refined form as members of the Naval Flight Demonstration Squadron, and are today in the middle of their second careers in business. Captain Keith Hoskins, Captain Greg McWhorter, and Commander Frank Weiser. Gentlemen, welcome. Well, let's kick it off with the first question. And Keith, we'll start with you. You finished your 27-year naval career here as a commanding officer of this Naval Air Station. But earlier in your career, you served on the Blue Angels as 3 seasons as narrator and then opposing and lead solo pilots. You were already familiar with this culture when you joined the team, but how do the Blue Angels approach this culture of briefing and debriefing differently?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin, for the question. First, I just want to say that it's an honor to be up here on this panel with you and Greg and Frank, and thank you so much for your service as we celebrate Veterans Day. That's a great question. You know, obviously when you come from the fleet, there is a level of trust and confidence that I think everyone imbues within themselves and then their squadron mates. Also, that transcends down to even the maintainers, the young men and women that take care of the aircraft in the fleet. There's just an underlying and a constant underscore of trust in every evolution that I saw in the fleet as a young junior officer. Having that opportunity to take that foundation, go into this wonderful organization, the Blue Angels, which is steeped in history and tradition, displays all of the pride and professionalism of the naval service, you have to kick that up just another notch of trust and confidence. I love to talk about the enlisted men and women of the Blue Angels. They've never, since 1946, have never had a show canceled because of their impeccable service and their ability to maintain these aircraft. Being a pilot, an officer, in a leadership role, in a demonstration pilot role, and again, embracing that trust and confidence in each of your teammates through every single maneuver is, you develop it, first of all, through the different evolutions of learning the different maneuvers. But what's incredible is how you just come closer together and you just build on that foundation of trust and confidence. And you really grow a strong brotherhood and a sisterhood because of just the constant and just the consistent focus on that trust and confidence. So it was definitely one of probably the most significant lessons that I took away, because you walk in the door thinking you understand trust and confidence, but over my span of 3 years, and these gentlemen I'm sure could talk to it as well, it enhances your ability to build trust. And also it displays your personal responsibility to that end as well, not just your other teammates.
Greg McWhirter, after your fleet squadron command tour, you joined the team as the flight leader, the boss, and served over several seasons in that role. But you began your career as a junior pilot, as a landing signal officer, and then as an elite Top Gun instructor. And in these roles, you provided constructive criticism to peers and seniors about their flying performance. Are there best or better ways to deliver constructive criticism?
Well, it's a challenge. I think you can go online and read about the importance of constructive criticism and the art of delivering constructive criticism. And I think that the way that we approach feedback and debriefing in naval aviation is kind of one of our calling cards. We learned at Top Gun and as an LSO, a landing signal officer, that you don't always get the opportunity to provide good feedback. Sometimes you have to tell folks what they didn't do as well as they should have. And I think that it's getting buy-in not only from the people that are providing the debrief, but the people that are accepting the debrief. That starts from the leadership all the way down to the most junior officer, is that if you are going to be involved in a program that has high expectations and high standards, you're also going to be involved in a program where the expectation is that you're going to receive very frank, honest debriefs, items that are actionable and constructive and done tactfully. And so as a young landing signal officer, there's nothing more, more disheartening than looking down the grade sheet and seeing a bad grade and seeing the name next to it is your commanding officer. And you're going to have to go into the ready room and debrief your commanding officer in front of a room full of junior officers and middle grade managers. And to walk into that ready room and have your commanding officer come up to you and say, "Let me hear it, Paddles." And you give him the feedback and he said, "Thanks, Paddles, that's what I thought, that's what I saw." It's an amazing cycle. And that's that buy-in from the leadership that says, "Hi, I not only value performance feedback, I value it for you, I value it for me. Not only do I expect you to seek out improvement, I expect the same thing of myself, and I'm going to participate in this program just like I expect you to participate in this program." It really is helpful, and that's what the program is built on. So there is certainly an art. You do need to be tactful. You need to give very good feedback to the individual, but it requires buy-in from all levels for it to work.
Commander Frank Weiser, you are without a doubt the coolest guy up here in that green flight suit, having just stepped out of a Super Hornet about an hour ago. You flew 2 tours with the team. And as a naval reservist, you have a foot in the military and in the business world. What was it like for you when you made your first foray into business?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me up here as well. For me, it was the point I got into in my career when I decided I was ready to move on to a different challenge, and that was, in my case, commercial real estate management and development. And it was a bit of a leap of faith, for sure, because it was so very different than anything I'd ever learned. I viewed that as a challenge, just like flight school, for example. And so the way I approached it was, if you were going to be good at commercial development, you can go to a large company and try to learn from people that are superior to you or more experienced than you, or I approached it the way we do in the Navy. And if you're a junior officer in a squadron and you check in, they give you the most menial tasks that are possible for an officer. And so you start very small by managing the coffee mess, and then you start managing the pilot records, and you move up until writing the schedule, but you go through all of the jobs. And then you become a middle manager, like Greg was saying, and you learn to manage the whole department. And then you take over the whole squadron. But by the time you take over, you know everyone's job. And you're very comfortable doing every single person's task. So for me, before I just jumped right into commercial development, I thought, well, I probably need to understand basic real estate, and I need to understand construction. So you have to start at the beginning and become a real estate agent. Not that I ever intended to sell residential real estate, but you also have to understand construction. So for me, I basically created my own flight school for construction by hiring myself as a general contractor for my own projects, and starting by driving the first nails and pouring the foundation and being a part of every single aspect of the job, so that when I finally got to a point where I'm developing large commercial buildings, then I couldn't be hoodwinked quite as easily. I knew what the people working were doing. I knew each of their respective jobs, and then I felt very comfortable kind of owning the whole project, if you will. And so that was, for me, a leap of faith, because it's very different than flying an airplane, but the method in which I went about learning it was about the same.
Keith, you commanded this Naval Air Station, one of the larger shore installations in the Navy. And you're now a senior VP in a multi-billion-dollar organization. In large institutions, things can happen. And bad news does not get better with age. How can you build a team to mitigate potential damage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I want to think back to when I was a commanding officer of my very first command in the Navy. I was a commander, and it was 2007. I took command of an F-18 Hornet squadron in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And, you know, I needed to work on the culture of that squadron. There had been some things that occurred in that squadron that needed to be fixed, and I needed folks to come forward with bad news so that we could fix you know, our culture and fix a lot of the leadership and some of the folks in that command. So I had to generate my first leadership philosophy, and it's still my leadership philosophy today. And, you know, as aviators, we like to think we're aces, right? So I came up with ACE, but I can't spell. There's an extra C in there. So it's ACCE. And A is for accountability. Accountability to yourself before you're accountable to others. The first C is compartmentalization, focus. Focus on the task at hand, and also analyze the outcomes while you're focusing on those tasks. The next C is collaboration. You know, collaborate across the entire organization, making sure that you're honest and truthful, and everything you do is full of integrity. And then E, empowerment. And, you know, empowerment is a buzzword, I'll just say it. And, but I'm real impressed with those leaders that actually operationalize that word. And I separate it into 2 different parts. The first part as a leader is I own it. If I'm going to empower my team, I need to ensure that I give them the proper, you know, the training, the resources, the personnel, the budgets, and also the top cover for them to complete their job. When that's done, they are empowered. So, with all that being said, imbuing that culture, imbuing that understanding that I'm going to hold you accountable. and I'm going to give you the necessary tools and resources. I'm going to empower you. When you build that culture, people will come to you with bad news. It doesn't sit and it doesn't brew. Because there's that buy-in and understanding. We talked about buy-in. Greg talked about it. There's that buy-in of understanding that I've got you. And in the current day, in business particularly, we're moving faster. We're more agile. We're flexible. Technology increases day by day. You have to chase it to make sure that we're providing the level of service to our members that we need. So we have a lot of projects that are ongoing. We have to be frank and honest of our progress. And when things go bad, we have to address them because we have to fix them. We have to bring the whole team in to address those issues. So I think that's so important. That's a great question. Thanks.
Yes, I will fix it. Greg, what about the need for contingency planning and having someone designated to make those audibles that often come up, not only in flight but in business?
You know, I think that's a great question as well, and I'm remiss not thanking you for having me out here today. This is really a great event. You know, planning for what's going to happen is great, but there's not a strike plan out there or not a tiger team or cross-functional team that doesn't have to look at other options, what could happen, what may happen. And so part of strike planning that we saw in the Navy and part of any team planning that you have is building the right team. And building that right team is a function of not just having experts, but having future experts, having those folks on the team that are also going to be the doers, all the analysts and the folks that are going to be able to do the busy work, because ultimately there's going to be some sort of deliverable that team is required to provide. And part of the planning process is game planning what could happen and what may happen that you don't plan on, okay? You don't want to happen or that you don't expect to happen. So the contingency planning is extremely important. And it's up to the planning team member, the lead, the strike planning team lead or the tiger team lead to decide, hey, at this point, this is where we're going to opt for contingency B, C. So during the planning, they'll say, this is what we'd like to have happen. This is what could happen. This is the point on the highway at which we need to get on this on-ramp. This is the point on the highway that we need to get off this off-ramp, and that's it. But if everyone who is a part of the planning has an idea of exactly when and how they're going to execute contingencies, then it runs very smoothly. If the first time you think about a problem is when it happens, it's all breaks. Everything stops right then and there. So it's really an integral part of the planning process, and it's up for the strike team member, lead, or the tiger team lead to make sure that everyone on that team knows exactly when that's going to happen and how they're going to execute the contingency plan.
And in the military, it's easier because there's seniority and there's rank. In the civilian world, though, do those tenets carry over?
Well, they can, and ultimately everyone on a team needs to understand their roles and responsibility. But everyone on the team is valued, very much valued. So it's important when you establish that team to also establish the hierarchy and who's going to make the call when, so that everyone on the team understands that, hey, I'm not surprised when something happens, but I'm also not surprised when something happens and it's directed by this person. So yeah, you have to be very directive on who's going to do that.
Frank, demo pilots such as yourself come from the fleet and then return to the fleet after their tours on the team. What does it mean when you say, happy to be here, boss?
So I think it speaks a lot to what Keith was talking about earlier, which is just the positive mental attitude that we have to bring with us. And I couldn't agree more with his sentiment that everyone who applies to the Blue Angels wants to be there. No one gets detailed to that assignment. No one is forced to go fly air shows. No one's forced to be a part of that organization. And by the same token, we have almost total control to pick whoever we want. And for us, it's empowering, but it's holding us accountable by the same token. And what I mean by that is, if we have a room of officers and we've all asked to be there, and we have then unanimously selected everyone else in that room, you have no real excuse to not get along, to work professionally, to have a positive relationship with all those people because you were part of them being there. And so when we speak as a team and we end every comment with either I'm fired up and ready to go or I'm glad to be here, it is kind of furthering this positive culture that exists. And perhaps there's a sentiment that maybe it's fake or it's forced, and we shake hands a lot, at least prior to March of 2020, and we have a lot of physical contact, and it's a very outwardly positive and almost to the point of being aggressive with how positive we are about everything. And I never felt like it was forced. And it's a virtuous cycle in that it just builds more positivity. And when one person says, I'm glad to be here, and the next person says, I'm glad to be here, it makes everyone else positive. Because you can have a negative Nancy that's part of an organization and drags everyone down, and this negativity can be a vicious cycle, but the positivity can be the same, but in a virtuous way. And so I always found that to be quite empowering for us, that everyone wanted to be there, and that you're going to have bad days for whatever reason. If you have something wrong with your family, if you flew a bad air show, who knows? And the more responsibility you have, the more likely you are to have things not go your way. And it helps to have 15 people being exceedingly positive if you're perhaps the one that's kind of dragging that day, because they end up lifting you up. And so there is a lot of goodness in my mind of finishing everything you say with, I'm glad to be here.
And that is a great point to finish any debrief. Keith, you flew in combat operations in each of your 3 fleet tours, from Bosnia to Afghanistan and points in between. And you led large formations of aircraft, strike packages, as we call them. Please describe the cross-functional planning aspects of those types of evolutions.
Yeah, great question. And, I love when people say that, because I think about my career, and I'm still amazed that every time I was on a ship going somewhere, unfortunately we were in harm's way. But I love to think about my days as I learned each incremental step from a junior officer to a senior officer, and learning tactics from instructors such as Greg, who was a Top Gun instructor, and learning how to be a tactical leader. Gaining the trust and confidence, as we've talked about, of being out front and leading these large force exercises or large strikes that could be up to 50 aircraft, of various aircraft with various missions. And in my current role as the Senior Vice President at Greater Pensacola, I find myself in that seat again, just on the corporate side. I've got 13 business units that are here in Pensacola. And I would say that they are, those 13 business units, they have an element lead. And, as you know, in strike aviation, you have element leads in each part of an element of that strike package. So our element leads are part of our... Yeah, you always got to start talking with your hands, but they're part of the Greater Pensacola Executive Leadership Team. So we've got all these different elements that are in place. So whenever we roll out a new strategy, or when we have a tactical execution of something in our business that will provide either a more efficient way of doing business, or maybe it's a regulatory matter, but ultimately it's to better serve our members, that coordination is very similar. You talked about briefs earlier. We meet weekly, we brief. We've seen some bad weather here in our area. We've had to have more briefs to talk about the bad weather, the inclement weather, and how we're going to respond to that. How do we take those different elements, and how do we match them up with other elements across our organization to ensure business continuity, again, to serve our members. But being at the seat, to have the opportunity to be an operational lead for all of these elements is very, very similar to that. And we've got a great leadership team. And I often joke with some of them and call them, my wingmen whenever we're working very close on certain projects or programs. And so they're picking up on that nomenclature just a little bit, but great question.
Greg, this one's for you. Did you or teams that you led ever fly a perfect demo?
Never. I don't think there's ever, honestly, I don't think there's ever a perfect day. It's, even you're hanging out there at the beach and everything, just not a worry in the world. I think that there's always something that could be just a little bit better. And it's not that we have unrealistic standards, It's just that we have very exacting way in which we need to fly and perform. And it was that way in our fleet squadrons. It was that way at Top Gun. It's that way in my business life right now. So there's always room for improvement. And that was kind of the go-in assumption, is that we are going to strive for perfection, but every day we're going to come back and take a really honest look at how we did, highlight the areas that we can improve in, and there are a lot of them, and then address it. You know, you come back from a flight at Top Gun, and even a particularly good flight, you could literally fill a whiteboard of all the things that went bad, and then a smaller whiteboard with the things that just went perfectly. You know, and we call them goods and others. And part of the art of being an instructor, and part of the art of learning how to teach men and women about fighter aviation was something very similar to what we used at the Blue Angels. Was, hey, let's talk about all these things. Let's have rules for our debrief, because obviously at Top Gun, you know, we had some very spirited discussions because everyone's very passionate about what we were doing. But the difference between Top Gun and the Blue Angels was that at Top Gun, you know, you can run off and blow off steam for a couple of days and everything would be okay. But in the Blue Angels, you're going to be flying a foot and a half next to that person in an hour. So there's no time, no settle time. So we had to establish some business rules on how to talk about that continuous improvement. And our rules were very simple. There were 5 of them. You know, it had to be constructive. In other words, there had to be something actionable and specific about what you were going to talk about. The second thing is it had to be relevant. You know, I don't care that your car's dirty. Let's talk about the actual flight today. It had to be tactful, as I mentioned before, and it had to be free of emotion. And I say that, but it's very important to understand that, you know, when you work in an organization that's full of passionate people, you're lucky. You're very lucky. You hope everyone's passionate, but that passion can sometimes, you know, turn into emotion when you talk about things that you're really, really energized about. And so those are the first 4 rules. The 5th rule is before you speak, remember that no one wants to get out of bed in the morning and stink it up. They just don't. Everyone comes to work with the right idea and the right thing in mind. So remember that before you open your mouth, and that's how you do it. So we would come back from these engagements, from these flights at Top Gun or from the flights at Blues, and have a laundry list of stuff that we wanted to work on, but we really tried to boil it down to a few key things. Hey, here's some things that you can work on, but here are the things that you did really, really, really well. Let's leave on a positive note and try to learn from that. You could literally bury yourself in all the stuff that you could do a little bit better. The fact of the matter is there is no perfect flight. You can't dwell on it. All you can do is pick the good stuff, learn from the bad stuff, and move on.
Absolutely. Finish with a positive. Frank, I think all of us and millions around the world are going to watch you in a movie next year. Please talk to us about the concept of operational risk management. You can tell us the C story about this movie, but the concept of ORM and how that is also related to business.
Okay, sure. So from an ORM perspective, at least in naval aviation, which we deal with every single day, and it's a key point of every brief. It's in the Blue Angels, one of the very last things we brief when we've covered everything, and we'll get to the safety aspect of the flight, and we'll say, does anyone have any ORM around the room? And it's almost become its own word, like Xerox or Zoom or something, where ORM now just, you know what it means, and so you cover, do I have any personal ORM? Do I have a family member that's sick that it might be on my mind? I think Greg or Keith mentioned compartmentalization. I think it was Keith. And for us in aviation, compartmentalization is one of the most important rules. And so it becomes one of the ways you mitigate any ORM risk.
And I'll remind everyone here that ORM is operational risk management, but please continue.
Yep. And so we look at operational risk management as a way to identify hazards or risks and then how we're going to mitigate them. And the way we do it, we break it down by either the likelihood and or the severity. And something that is not likely and not severe, meaning that it won't cause harm to the aircraft or the aircrew, and it's probably not going to happen, infinitesimally small chance, it has a very low ORM risk. We assign a risk matrix. If it's very likely and also catastrophic, then it becomes the highest level of risk. And so that requires, before you would take off, a fairly complex solution to mitigate that risk. So for us, for example, and in the upcoming Top Gun movie, one of the scenes that we were flying, or that I was flying, was a very low altitude ingress to a target area that they were using for for, in this case, the first trailer that came out. And so there was a lot of attention given to flying a Super Hornet at low altitude, barely over the ground. Not because it's challenging to do necessarily. Low and fast is great fun, but it's not hard from my aviation perspective. But
Will it give away the story if you tell us how low and fast?
let's let the movie come out. I say that to Greg because it is very clear to all Blue Angel fans around the world that the favorite maneuver is the sneak pass. No one will argue that. And generally a Diamond pilot will say something to the effect of, can't be that hard, you're just flying low and fast. However, the likelihood of something going wrong is slim. The severity, should it go wrong when you're at low altitude and fast, could be catastrophic. So in the case of the movie, at that low altitude, you don't have a whole lot of time for things to go wrong. Once we briefed this flight, it came up at the very end of the brief that the producer said, I'd like also at the very end of this to pull up to the helicopter that's going to be about 1,000 feet over this target and point right at him. And what caught me off guard was the fact that we had not discussed this at all. And that was, in my mind, at least as dangerous as what we were doing at low altitude over the ground. And so I said, the first thing of ORM is let's slow down and discuss this a little more in depth, and let's talk about the risks. And my first risk was, I'm going extremely fast. I don't have time to look up and figure out where the helicopter is. So unless he's in the perfect position, I'm not going to be able to fly low and then also keep, time shed and find where this chopper is. And then once I can find him, the aircraft is not terribly maneuverable at fast speed. It's just like a car, your turn radius gets bigger. And so if I'm pointing at this helicopter, at some point I need to turn away. And they had, I think, inaccurate expectations for what our aircraft capabilities were, and that I could just roll up on a wing and miss them. And the comment was made, pull up until you're right about to hit us and then just miss us. And I said, I'm happy to give this a shot. We're going to talk through some ways we mitigate this, but we'll tell you right away I'm not comfortable with it, and so we're going to approach this very cautiously. And we went out and did it, and it wasn't terribly safe in my estimation, so we did what we call a knock it off. And I just said, we're done doing this. Let's come back, let's sit back, let's debrief it, rebrief it, and go up again. And we put some more mitigating factors in play where we sent the helicopter higher. I flew slower. We broke the scene up. And so that was an easy way to mitigate what could have been an extremely risky endeavor. And in my particular case, what I was grateful for is I was a 20-year Navy commander with a lot of flight time under my belt, and I felt very confident saying, what we're trying to do is unsafe. Let's slow this down and talk through it. Had I been a bit more junior, I might have been a little bit more eager to say, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. What could go wrong? We haven't had friends, we haven't had peers make mistakes, and we haven't learned from their mistakes. And one of the things we do exceedingly well in naval aviation is we learn from other people's mistakes. We watch them happen, we brief, we debrief, we prevent those. We'll find new ways to make creative mistakes, but we don't want to remake the same mistakes that our brothers and sisters have already paid for, sometimes with their blood. Now, how does that relate to a civilian perspective? Well, anytime you find yourself in a situation that you have an increased level of risk, you need to be confident enough in what you're doing to stop and say, I'm not comfortable. You might act like you're confident. Certainly in construction, there are a lot of people who want to be really tough. And, well, if you can't do it, I can do it. Okay, that's fine. There's an expression in aviation, there are old pilots and bold pilots. There just aren't any old and bold pilots because they didn't live long enough. And the same thing is true in construction. And you get up on a roof and your knees are shaking because it's the end of the day and you're hot and you've got heavy pieces of lumber or OSB. And someone needs to be the adult and say, what we're doing is not safe. Let's go down and let's talk about this. And we can't all be tough guys here. And we're going to find a safe way to do what we're doing. And in aviation, at least, whether it's a factor of we're a little bit older or we have advanced degrees, there's a little bit more maturity has been my experience thus far. And so we're more willing to say, I'm not comfortable, or that makes me scared for whatever reason, and we can talk about it. There's less ego in it in that sense, that we're a little bit more mature and perhaps self-confident that we can say that sort of thing.
Well, Keith, Frank talks about something that we all know, that this business can at times be unforgiving. Are there similar risks in the business world?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a variety of risks that as a business, particularly a business of our size, that we have to take into consideration. I mean, we have specific departments at Navy Federal Credit Union, for that matter. I would say all financial institutions and very large businesses where you have to focus daily on risk. So we use the term ORM. In the corporate world, they will understand ERM, which is enterprise risk management. And the analysis is very, very similar to what you would do in aviation. It's just, when we talk of mitigations, we have different, we use a different lexicon, but it's for the same purpose. It's all about the soundness of your business. It's, identifying those risks to ensure that you remain financially suited to take care of not only your business and your employees, but in my case also, our members as well. But absolutely, when you look at it from a risk perspective, it's constant, it's daily, it's weekly, it's briefed at the management council level, all the way across the organization. We have several different business units across the enterprise that are locked together in specific programs to evaluate risk, brief those results out to the entire management council. Like I said, it's constant. There's not a business out there, a large business, that doesn't implement those tools that Frank was talking about in mitigating risk. Particularly in 2020, what we've seen this year, I can tell you there's been a hyper focus on managing risk in all of our businesses.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This event wouldn't be possible without our community partners. To recognize and introduce our co-sponsors, I present to you the Dean of the UWF College of Business, Dr. Rick Fountain. Rick?
Thank you, Sherry. And before I recognize our sponsors for today's event, I want to say a word of thanks to Sherry Hartnett. She runs the Executive Mentor Program at the University of West Florida and is responsible for this wonderful event today. And as she said, we could not do it without community partners, our sponsors. I want to recognize Navy Federal Credit Union and Penn Air Credit Union for their sponsorship today. We have with us representatives from each: Captain Keith Hoskins, Senior Vice President, Navy Federal Credit Union, and Pam Hatt, Vice President of Marketing, Penn Air Federal Credit Union. By the way, Pam is one of our executive mentors. So thank you both to Navy Federal Credit Union and Penn Air Credit Union.
Thank you, Dean Fountain. First, I want to recognize what today is all about. It's our veterans. On behalf of the entire Navy Federal Credit Union team, happy Veterans Day. Thank you so much for your service to our country, and thank you for the many sacrifices for our freedoms. And to all the loved ones that support your veterans, thank you. So I'm so humbled and excited to be here today as we take a look at mission continuous improvement. It falls in line with our guiding principles at Navy Federal Credit Union. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you to the University of West Florida's Executive Mentor Program for being such a gracious host to this event. Navy Federal Credit Union, we're a proud sponsor of this event and very, very delighted to be here to support this incredible executive mentorship program. This program allows our leaders the opportunity to mentor with these young, incredible students as we build out the future business leaders of our community, also our innovative thinkers of our community, and also very agile change agents. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of our mentors that were part of this program and how rewarding this program is. And I can tell you, it's not just rewarding for the students, it's very rewarding to each one of our executive mentors. So again, I would like to thank you so much for your commitment to developing our future leaders in our community, and I will now turn it over to Pam Hatt.
Thank you, Keith. As Keith said and Sherry said, I am Pam Hatt, Vice President of Marketing at Penn Air Federal Credit Union. I'm also a proud veteran of the United States Navy. Penn Air's history began right here on board NAS Pensacola back in 1936. And all it was a group of like-minded people that came together with a shoebox full of money and a mission to enhance lives, and they started our credit union. Now, fast forward 84 years, and we still understand the value of partnering with like-minded people and organizations like our friends at Navy Federal Credit Union and the University of West Florida. These partnerships strengthen our community, and when our community is strong, everyone benefits. It is truly an honor to sponsor such a successful program like the Executive Mentorship Program. I personally am involved, and I get more out of giving than probably the mentees. So if you are not currently involved, I strongly suggest you reach out to Dr. Hartnett and see if you can become an executive mentor. This program truly is a like-minded program and is enhancing lives in our community, especially the future leaders of our community. We are proud to be a co-sponsor of this event, so please enjoy and go Navy.
Well, I see Dr. Hartnett here, and I believe that there are some questions from our audience.
Yes, there are. We have some questions from our virtual audience for you all today. So the first is, how did you transition your sense of purpose from your time with the Blue Angels back to the civilian world?
Greg, why don't you take that one?
That's a great question. It was an interesting transition. I did my MBA at the end of my career, so after the Blue Angels. And so I had almost 25 years of learning the military way to do it. And I was actually very surprised just how different the military and civilian business are, but also how many similarities are. The first thing I just assumed is that I assumed that it was all about the people was the big difference. I assumed that everyone in the military was serving for some sense of duty, and that everyone in the civilian world was doing something else. And it turns out that so many people, and people that I work with now in the civilian world, joined organizations not just because of the pay, not because of the benefits, because they believe in something about that organization. And oh, by the way, you have people in the military that join just for the pay. Some people join just to pay for college, and that's okay. What I really found about the difference between the civilian and the business world was ultimately the bottom line. In the military, our bottom line is often defined by, by retention and promotion and advancement for our sailors, and that's a great thing. But in the civilian world, the bottom line is always, a P&L statement. Maybe it's something at the end of the year, where you have to answer to shareholders. So that was something that I found very interesting. But what I tried to embrace and what I tried to take from the Blue Angels in my time at Top Gun and the fleet was capitalize on the similarities, and the similarities is all about the people. We have these organizations, and whether you've got a 10-person flight department or 20, 30, 40,000 people in your organization, you've got this incredible collection of people from diverse backgrounds. They've got different experiences, they've got different perspective, they've got different things in their culture and their life that have shaped them as individuals, and your job as a leader in business is to capitalize on that, to take advantage of all these differences. The other big thing is to place value in every person in your organization. It doesn't matter whether you are a high-level executive, a middle manager, or an entry-level data analyst. Your job matters. And so an example I often give is in the Navy, our youngest men and women are airmen out there in the aircraft carrier, and one of their jobs is to wash airplanes. No one joins the Navy to wash airplanes or to clean bathrooms, but it's an important job because we don't outsource that. And so when you sit down and you talk to a 19-year-old young woman and say, hey, this is why we wash the airplanes. You're taking that $40 or $50 million asset and you're increasing its lifespan, because life out on the aircraft carrier is tough for us. It's really tough for a piece of machinery. And so every time you wash that airplane, I know it's hard, and I know we give you a bucket and goggles and mops and stuff like that, but you are providing a service not only to this organization, but to the bigger Navy and to the country, because that asset is very valuable. So when you can take that level of interest in an organization and create value in all the jobs and make sure that it doesn't matter whether they work in the mailroom or they're on the marketing team, their job matters, and you as a leader value what they do, and it takes us all working together, it's a big thing. That's what I took from kind of the Blue Angels and from my time in the Navy and took it into the business world, because it does matter. And people, ultimately, it all comes down to relationships, and it all comes down to people. At the end of the day, when you've got good people around you who know what they're doing and are excited about being there, great things are going to happen.
Thank you. That's a great way to instill a sense of purpose. I have another question. So what are your best practices on how to move on from a mistake or a failure?
Mistake or failure? Who wants to handle
Well,
that
assume
one?
we all make them sometimes.
I'm happy to get that if that's okay. And it's actually one of the notes I wrote down earlier. And for me, there's a really awesome way we handle this in naval aviation that addresses how to deal with mistakes. And it really comes back, it's not necessarily a Blue Angel thing for us, but it certainly can be. And it's mostly equated to being at the aircraft carrier. And so when we're preparing to land at the aircraft carrier, you do a lot of what we call field carrier landing practice. But you go in the landing pattern, in some cases hundreds of times, to prepare yourself to land on the aircraft carrier. And so you'll get maybe 5, 10 different attempted landings before you actually go out. And we refer to it as going to school each pass. So there's someone that Greg was talking about earlier who grades each landing, but you also, as the pilot, know if you did it correct or incorrectly and what you did wrong. And so if you know, for example, that you started off high and then you didn't have enough power and then you went low and then you added too much because you overcorrected and then you missed landing on the aircraft carrier, then you kind of reverse engineer that process and you say, all right, I know what I did last time. I've got to not do that again. I won't make the same mistake twice. I'll find a new mistake to make. I just won't make that one again. And so in some cases, you try to err the other way. I had too much straightaway, so this time I want to be a little bit too short. Or I was high, so I want to be just a tiny bit too low. And you try to bracket what your mistake was before. So to that degree, if you encounter failure, you're going to try and you're going to fail. You will prevent a multitude of mistakes if you make the same mistake fewer times. And to us, the way we do that is by going out of your way to debrief your failures and go to school every attempted pass. And in the air show, for the Blue Angel perspective, it's when we have, in my position, just like Keith's was the solo pilot. And so we'll have multiple times the solo pilots cross. And we're trying to do it right in front of the crowd. And if we don't do it exactly right, we might end up too far right or left, or too high or too low. And so as you're preparing for the next one, you just have to reverse engineer. What did I do to get myself to that incorrect position? Let me not make that same mistake twice.
It's good advice.
That's a great point. Going to school and not making the same mistake. But if you do continue to make them as an individual, we will work with you and give you the training that we need. Great answer.
So I do have a lot of questions from our virtual audience. Here's the next one. What core values did you gain from your experience with the Blue Angels that you still implement and hold on to today?
Yeah, I definitely want to take that one. First, I want to say that, it was a childhood dream of mine to become a Blue Angel, ever since I was 5 years old. And once I had that opportunity and I really understood the commitment to excellence, when I stepped in that briefing room for the first time wearing a blue flight suit and just really understanding the quality men and women that serve, again, enlisted all the way to officers across the entire team, the commitment to excellence, that's critical. You don't get that everywhere. And to be a part of an organization, to get someone to raise you to that level, because I walked in and I wasn't there, but I learned from those Blue Angels that were before me. Again, since 1946, you get to meet some of the former Blue Angels from, way back in the early days, having conversations where it's, you close your mouth and you open your ears and you listen and you learn and you understand their dedication and you try to glean from that and you try to apply it every single day. And I continue to do that in my second career, in my corporate career.
That's great. Words that we can all learn from, for sure. So this might be a little tricky. Is there a difference in ethical standards in the Blue Angels as compared to the corporate world?
Frank, you want to give that one a shot?
I was really hoping that would go to Greg, actually. No, I'd be happy to answer that. is there a difference in ethical standards between the Blue Angels and the corporate world? I would say no. Thank you.
Probably there shouldn't be.
No,
That's fine.
I would, let me add a bit to that. I, like Keith, agree that the high standard that is maintained on the Blue Angels brings everybody else up. It raises everyone to that standard. The teams I've served with, I thought to a person were exceptional. And this group idea that we could make each other better does in fact work. It was as buttoned up and as professional an organization as I have ever been a part of. And for sure, most of my positive traits as a professional come from my time on the Blue Angels when I did return to the fleet. And it was the first time I'm engaged with maybe a senior officer, and it's the Blue Angel way. You stand right up, and it's very respectful, and you're polished, and you just are used to doing that. And it would catch people off guard to some degree. But certainly from an ethical perspective, the standards should be the same, certainly across the military, is my estimation. And I would like to think in the corporate world as well, although I agree with Greg's sentiment that to some degree, we are very much driven by a sense of purpose and cause, and no one, well, I definitely think some people join to get college paid for, but you don't stay in the military to get rich, you stay in because you believe in what you're doing. And whether the bottom line is the P&L statement or whether it's something else, to the degree that we can make any organization about the people and the team and the drive and the desire to succeed, then I think we're better off. But from an ethical perspective, maybe I'm too rose-colored glasses, but I'd like to think that it's the same.
Okay.
You know,
great.
and if I can add something,
Yes.
I completely agree with Frank. I don't think that there is any difference. You know, when I stepped into the civilian world, that was one of my questions. I was like, boy, how much of an uphill battle is it going to be? And it wasn't.
Good.
Honestly, when you set standards, and their standards and ethics, it removes so much of the gray area, and people love that. And I'll tell you, when I went to my flight department, I was surrounded by all these great people, and we just talked about how we were going to do business. And they said, well, how did you guys do it in the Blue Angels, or how did you do it at Top Gun? I was like, well, we did it just like this. Like, well, why don't we all just do it like that? And I was like, well, that's great. So it's not like, it wasn't a lot of resistance. It wasn't any resistance. It was just a matter of, boy, that makes sense. When you do things right, it just makes it easy, and it takes all the guesswork out of it. So I found that the transition from military to civilian, from an ethical standpoint, was really easy, and it was really well embraced.
That's great to hear.
Sherry, if I may, I want to
Yes.
jump in here with
Please do.
a question, and I want to go back to you, Greg, with this one. You were a Top Gun instructor and an expert in a field of fighter aviation. Before you gave your first lecture, and later, as you qualified as a strike leader, you went through something called a murder board. What is a murder board?
Well, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? You know, a murder board process is a series of wickets that you go through when you are becoming what we call in the Navy a SME, or a subject matter expert. So my first area of expertise was infrared weapons at Top Gun. And so it started off with me doing my lecture prep, which began with me finding the old SME and looking at all his notes, stacks and stacks and stacks, taking trips around the country, meeting people that actually build the weapons, going to the labs so you can actually break it down and see exactly what goes into this building this weapon. And then you come back to Top Gun and you develop this lecture. And this lecture can be 1 hour long, it could be 16 hours long. And it's something that's going to be given to each Top Gun class. And you build a lecture that is going to get these men and women that are coming through the course in and out of that material with enough information to say, hey, I've got a good handle on this system, but I also know where to get all the rest of the information. And you sit down over the course of the next month, and through a series of lectures, you give each member of the Top Gun staff that lecture, maybe not on a one-on-one basis, but usually a 1 on 3 or 4 basis, and you go through this murder board process. And each time you finish giving that lecture, you sit down with them, and they've got a stack of notes, and they say, here's what worked for me as a student, here's what didn't work for me as a student, here's what I, with my experience as a Top Gun instructor, think you could use to better convey your information. And you do that. So you go through these pre-boards, usually 10 or 12 of them, and at the end, you do it all over again with the entire Top Gun staff there. You go in the morning, you bring them all donuts, everything, because they know they're going to be in there for the long haul. You give the entire staff the entire lecture, And then you sit down for the next 8 or 10 hours and they will debrief you individually again so that you are prepared. And the first time you give that lecture to a student, they see a very, very polished product. But the end result is fantastic. But it's a very hard process, and that's called a murder board.
I love that idea. As a marketing professor at the University of West Florida, I want to have one of those murder boards. I'm going to have to try that.
Be careful what you ask.
Time for another question? Okay. So how did your time with the Blue Angels teach you about how to handle conflict within your team? And how do you apply that to your career now?
If you don't mind, I'll take that. As Frank alluded to, we were solo pilots. So, I started out as a narrator, had to work for the lead solo pilot, who was the operations officer of the team. So I really got to learn a lot about the in and outs of going to different show sites and setting up the show site. And then eventually I would get out of that role and step into the number 6 position as an opposing solo. And I can just tell you that everything we've said about building that trust and confidence and being able to take criticism and having rules around that criticism, I can tell you sometimes it does get passionate. Sometimes it gets passionate. During my time at the team, there was some passion around the way that we were flying. We flew great shows, but we wanted to continuously get better and better and better. And sometimes you would clash. Maybe it wasn't something that I would see in the demonstration, and I was being taught to look at certain things that I just really couldn't figure out at the time, and I would get frustrated with myself because I want to perform, and it creates a little bit of conflict. But what's great about that is that at the end of the day, you figure it out, because you can't carry that conflict into the next flight. You just can't do it. You got to get rid of it. You got to fix it, as we say in the Blue Angels. You have to fix it, and you have to move on. So conflict does exist, but it's how you handle it. Those are the professionals that are out there. They take on that conflict real time. They take it head on. They sort it out, and then you move on get better and fix it.
That's what we should all remember to do. Absolutely. So
Can I add something to that
go
really,
ahead,
just
please
for a
do.
moment, because I think it's a very salient point for us. To your question, some of the very best advice I ever received in the military was in two-part. When you're in a contentious experience like that, as the leader, it's to always underreact. And it's a single word. If you find yourself in a position where you are frustrated or disappointed or angry, the solution is always to underreact and then wait for a solution to present itself or to receive all the information that you probably don't have. And then from a peer perspective, what I've always found works best is, those are some of our friends on their way up to Virginia Beach. What I've always found works best with peers, because it's not necessarily the same situation where you can underreact and solve it, is to take the blame on yourself. Even if you're quite frustrated with someone else because you believe they're wrong, to just phrase it in such a way and say, I'm sorry for the way I acted. I have a hard time with how I either perform that maneuver or handle that discussion, and I'm angry with myself. I'm not disappointed in you, I'm just mad at me, and I will get over it on my own. And like Keith said, I'll fix it and we'll make it right. So those two avenues or aspects for me have always helped a lot when you're dealing with a contentious experience like that.
That's great advice, and definitely something you probably need to practice until you get more comfortable with it being natural and that you remember it. So awesome. I do have another question. So what could businesses do better to adapt U.S. veterans to the workforce?
Keith, there's a military branch of service in the name of your company, and maybe maybe you have some veterans in your company. I imagine you do. How do you handle it?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that question, because, obviously on the occasion, love talking about veterans. And, we're very, very active in recruiting veterans. Obviously, we serve those that serve. If I think back, obviously I wasn't around, but in 1933, the whole reason why Navy Federal became existent is to be able to have the opportunity to allow those civilians in the Department of the Navy to be able to have a credit union that they could trust, that would meet their needs, and allow them to have loans and credit. And then obviously that grew into where we are today. I mean, we started out as an exclusive all-Navy type of credit union. Now we serve all services. So it only behooves us as an organization to have very targeted and focused programs to recruit and retain veterans. There's skill bridge programs that we leverage, partnering with the Department of Defense, whereas active duty members can take the last 180 days of their service, come work for Navy Federal or another type of organization. We will train them. It's like an internship. And then at the end of that, they have an opportunity to be hired. We've actually leveraged that program here with some of the service members that serve here at Naval Station Pensacola and also Whiting Field. We have thus far, and I believe the number is 4, we've hired 4 so far this year. When I take a look at our veterans that we've hired here just this year, year over year, on our campus here in Pensacola, we're at about 26% of veterans. So again, we're very, very focused on those veteran programs. I had the opportunity to partner with Hire Heroes, which is it's a business specifically that looks at where are the careers best suited for military when they transition out of the service. We also partner with other organizations to come out with the best cities for veterans when they get out of the service. So again, Navy Federal Credit Union, I like to say, when it comes to veterans, we're all in.
Sherry, I've got one here that I've laid out for you, Frank. We hear and touched on this earlier about fragile pilot egos. Not that any of us have any firsthand knowledge of this, but there are techniques to manage them. Can you please tell us about the goods and others matrix and the benefits of debriefing in the third person?
Make sure I understood how we deal with fragile egos when we're discussing the goods and others?
Well, we have, instead of good and bad, we don't like bad, so we have goods and others. And then there's the third person aspect of it.
Sure. I'd like to think that we all have fairly thick skin. For us, it definitely starts with we are going to a great deal of trouble up here to refer to each other by our first names because we know in aviation we use nicknames for almost everything. And so our call signs is one of the very first way when you join a squadron where it is absolutely meant to hurt your feelings in one way, shape, or form. And it's never quite as great as the movies make it seem. But it's one way to, if you showed up with too much ego and too much pride, it brings you back down to what should be your humble expectations to serve. When you deal with individuals that have some sort of fragile ego, I think the aviation way is that you keep picking at them until almost to the point where you break them, a little bit like boot camp. You have to break someone down and rebuild them in the image that the service requires. And so to some degree, squadrons are very much like that, where if you see a weakness in someone, in an effort to make them stronger, not to break them, but in an effort to make them stronger, you pick at that weakness until you expose it, and then as a team, you build that person back up. So I would say most of the people that I've served the great majority of my career with, they don't have fragile egos, but we all probably did start with them at some way, shape, or form. And that's the method in which we do it. We have to be hard on each other. We have to hold each other to an exacting standard, like we mentioned before. But it's to find the weaknesses, find the inabilities of those particular aircrew, and then expose them and work with them to make it better. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question from our virtual audience. And so keep in mind that a lot of our viewers today are college students that are watching this. And so the question from the audience is, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the next generation of leaders?
First of all, every time I meet young people out there, I'm more encouraged than ever for the future of our country. It's fantastic, and whether you get a chance to meet them on the crowd line or here at the museum or visiting colleges and campuses around the country, it is really neat because you can fall into the the trap of oh, they don't know what's going on, and quite honestly, nothing is good as our generation. But the fact of the matter is they're very bright and they're going to do wonderful things. I think one of the challenges that we will see is with the advent of social media and electronic communications. I think kind of the art of communicating and getting to know people. As I mentioned before, I really believe that it's all about relationships. I think that the pillars of teamwork, when you talk about communication and you talk about trust and you talk sacrifice, a lot of that stuff has to happen in person at some point, because that's truly how you get to know people and how to know what makes people tick. When you have a large organization that you work with, the fact of the matter is what motivates the 45-year-old executive is a lot different than what motivates the 25-year-old, marketing team member. It's just different, and the only way to figure out how people tick is to get to know them and to have a relationship with them and to spend time with them. And so I think that it's very easy to send emails and send texts and get on the social media, but at some point you almost have to get back to the basics. You know, I still insist on my daughters who are grown now to still pick up the phone and call friends. You know, pick up the phone and call. Don't just text, because there's something lost in translation. You know, tone of voice, body language, inflection. That's all important part of communication. And so I think that the next generation could possibly take a step back and spend a little more time face to face with each other and figure out what makes people tick. I really do believe that it's, from an organizational standpoint, from a teamwork standpoint, it's instrumental to understand people, and you lose a lot via electronic media.
That's true. Keith?
Greg, that's perfect. I just
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to add one thing to that. A couple years ago, I had the opportunity. I spoke at one of the Rotary clubs here in the Pensacola area, and the topic that they gave me to talk about is leading millennials. So I got to do some research, and to the audience that's watching out there, that are college students, I came upon a data set. 79% of millennials wanted to own their own business. They want to be their own boss. Mm-hmm. But of that 79%, they asked, well, if you can't have your own business, what type of leader would you want to work for? And this is why 72% of the 79% said, I want to work for someone who is a coach and a mentor. So what I would say to all of those that are out there watching, I mean, look at the title of this program, Get a Mentor. It is so critically important to have a leader out there to teach you how to be a professional, how to be a leader, a supervisor, a manager, how to lead through change. I mean, all the things that we talked about up here, it's so important to have a mentor. So I put it on us, my generation, because this younger generation, they're fantastic. And it's up to us to mentor them.
Thank you. And I love that answer, and I did not preset that one up. So.
It's interesting because it kind of all ties in. Frank
It
mentioned
does.
a couple of aviation quotes earlier, but one of the greatest aviation quotes is about pilots. Is the pilot who teaches himself how to fly has a fool for a student. You got to have a mentor, and that's the only way to figure out how to get through this world, especially in business.
Greg, I've got a question for you that involves the word trust that we talked about earlier. As the boss, you had 3 or 5 airplanes flying on you, tremendous responsibility. You now manage a team that delivers precision aviation services to high net worth individuals. Please talk to us about the concept of trust on the team and in business.
Well, I would say they're one and the same, but every element of trust is a little bit different. Obviously, we've talked about trust a bit here today. It's the cornerstone of everything we do, certainly in the military and aviation, but in business as well. Trust is a wonderful thing. Good organizations have good amounts of trust. High-performing organizations have exceptional amount of trust, and bad organizations usually have some element of missing trust somewhere in the chain of command. It may not be all bad, but ultimately trust can really define how well an organization does. The tough part about trust is it's not built overnight. It's built over time. It takes day after day, week after week, sometimes year after year of continuous, repetitive, superior performance, trustworthy performance to build that trust. And it can be decimated in an instant. It really can. As an example, as a flight leader, I was expected to know my procedures, and it started from the first day. The first day I was going to walk into the briefing room with one of my wingmen, and I needed not only how to give the brief, but I needed to know my procedures cold, as he did. He needed to know his procedures cold. And I had to do that not only on the first day, because that was the first step, the first stone in our little trust tower. It had to happen on the second day, and it had to happen on the third day. And every time we got debriefed, I needed to go in with that open mind saying, hey, this young man who has a fraction of the time in the Navy that I do and a fraction of the time in the airplane that I do was going to provide feedback on everything I did, and it wasn't always going to be good. And I had to look him in the eye and say, that's exactly what I saw. I'm going to fix it, and I'm glad to be here. And so every step in that process goes to building trust. And ultimately, you end up with 6 airplanes flying 12 to 18 inches apart. But it doesn't happen on the first day. It happens over time. And so you take that philosophy into civilian aviation and business aviation. And it's the same concept. This is what our standard is. This is the weather that we will fly into, and this is the weather that we won't fly into. It's not because we don't have courage. It's because we're smart enough to know when to say when. We're smart enough to know when to turn around. Our clients, the people that pay us money to make sure that them and their families are safe, are counting on us to make that decision. And that level of trust doesn't happen just because I walked in the door. That level of trust happens because every time I brief it, I adhere to a standard. And when we don't meet that standard, we step back and we reevaluate it. Everyone on that team does. And we've also had the same discussion with our clients. This is our criteria. I know you want to go, but it's not, in my estimation, it's not safe. That builds trust between me and them. So it's all of it's everywhere, and it takes time to build, and it takes repetitive work to build.
Sherry, do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
All right, and this is a question I've been saving, and I would like to get an answer from each of you. Gentlemen, thank you. Gentlemen, can this culture of continuous improvement that we talked about today be learned and applied? Keith, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is the theme here. And I think the reason why we're here is because, yes, it can be learned. You hear the term a lot, natural-born leader. And then you hear a term where you have leaders that have really worked hard to get to where they are in life, to get to their leadership role ultimately, because they had to learn along the way. It wasn't perfect all the time. They made mistakes. We talked about failing earlier. How do you fail? How do you fail fast? How do you learn? How do you move on from that and fix it? That's all about continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is not defined as doing everything perfect every single time and doing it right every single time. I mean, look at some of the great advancements of this great nation of ours. We're in this museum and all these airplanes, and earlier we were in the Apollo room. Think about the Apollo program. How many failures they had. But they continuously improved because they learned. And I think for our viewers out, I think it's important that you learn to fail, because that's when you improve. And there's a lot of people that are hesitant to embrace failure. We talked about operational risk management. We talk about business risk management. You put parameters in place to mitigate so those failures are not at such magnitude where it's catastrophic, and you learn from it. So absolutely, I think it can be learned.
Greg?
I couldn't agree more. It certainly can be learned, and I think that's one of the wonderful things when you have people like Keith and Frank stepping into the civilian world, because they take all these lessons learned and these best practices. What we do in business aviation is a little bit different than we do in the Blue Angels, because I tell everyone that, hey, we don't need to do a 2-hour debrief after a flight from Teterboro to Oakland. We just don't need to. But what we do need to do every day is to sit down and kind of highlight some things that we did well and some things that we could have done better. And I'll tell you, the idea of highlighting that stuff is one thing, but the idea of verbalizing it in front of other people scares people to death. It really does. It's almost like public speaking. So when you sit down and talk to a business aviation pilot or a flight attendant who spent 20 or 30 years never talking about what they did at work, and then say, hey, I want you to sit down and just say, hey, pick 3 things that you could have done better. Man, you talk about seeing them sweat. But then after they do it a couple times, they're like going, oh, this is easy. It's actually a little liberating to talk about some of this stuff. So it makes them not only more aware real time what they're doing, but also very honest about how they can get better. And then the other thing we do, and we do in the Blue Angels, is we have specific goals. You know, every day you go into the brief and you've got 900 steps that you're going to do in order to complete a demonstration. But you identify a specific goal. Today, my specific goal is this. I want to do this a little bit better. And so if you go in every day and you have a specific goal, man, I want to return all the emails that came in before 10 o'clock, or I want to do something, just have something that highlight is specific. That's continuous improvement. And those 2 things really have made a big difference for us, at least in our little world in business aviation.
All right, so I'll add one final twist. I agree with both Keith and Greg, and continuous improvement, in my opinion, is going to happen no matter what. It's our human nature to not just routinely make the same mistake over and over again, and it could be as simple as, bumping your head into a wall if it's a low hanging fruit kind of thing. Your body will ultimately tell you that you're making a mistake. But what I would add, maybe perhaps triple hair nerdy for a college sense, is the derivative. It's the rate of change in which you improve. So everyone's going to improve, but if you want to be successful, it's how fast you improve. Are you improving at a faster rate than those around you? Everyone's showing up from UWF with the same education. You taught them, they sat through the same courses. Now, how fast are they going to apply what you've taught them? And are they actively working to apply it faster than their peers? In flight school in the Navy, the best pilot with the highest grades is not the one who is necessarily the best at the very last flight. It's the one who learned the fastest and then got better grades over the course of 2 years. So what I would say to that is just continuous improvement, in my estimation, will happen no matter what. That's sort of Darwinianism. It has to happen. But to the degree that you can accelerate your rate of change and learn faster, likely more successful.
Love it.
Wow, guys, we've had a fascinating and wide-ranging discussion today about this subject, and I know that our audience can appreciate and benefit from it. Gents, thanks for your insights into this topic and for your time today with our executive mentors and mentees. To the University of West Florida College of Business and Dr. Sherry Hartnett in particular, who planned, briefed, and led the effort to produce this panel today. Debrief to follow. Thank you so much for your servant leadership. Special thanks to our many sponsors, and especially to the National Naval Aviation Museum staff who hosted this superb event in this wonderful facility. Thanks for coming, everyone.